What is going on, everybody? Today is the 4th of October. Reading an interesting story about Fred Hopkins back in my home state of South Carolina, looking at that and kind of a matter of disgust. Police apparently tried to enter a home and they ended up shooting a guy. This seems to be happening a lot lately. There was a story out of Texas just about a week ago, where officer walked into the wrong apartment and mistaking it as her own somehow, or so the story claimed. She changed it, I think, like 3 or 4 times. Ended up shooting a guy in his own house, and they tried to spin it for about 48 hours that it was just an honest mistake. And so this story came out earlier today. Looking at what happened, it appears as if they did have a warrant in this case. They were trying to serve it on a individual who was 27 years old for child abuse allegations, who resided in the home. The father, I am assuming, I'm not sure of the connection to the individual who was 27, but I make that assumption, was Fred Hopkins, who was a previous lawyer, previous vet from Vietnam, and then ended up on the wrong side of the law in this case, with 7 officers dead on the other side before he was apprehended. Now, the story isn't exactly clear on how he was apprehended because it says that he suffered head injuries. I'm not sure if that was from where he was shot. The story makes it sound as if he tripped, fell, and hit his head. So he's currently recovering in the hospital and is unable to tell his side of the story. So for now, all we have is the media interviewing police and giving their version of the story. We tend to find that once the victims themselves come out and are able to tell their side on the citizens' version, that it usually doesn't go as well for the police. So they're making the most of the story while they can, making hay while the sun shines, so to speak. But the details that we have so far, this was a 74-year-old individual who had a hobby with firearms. He's posted on his Facebook shooting rifles, and he's somewhat of an enthusiast for that. Not an expert marksman necessarily. He does do competitions, but he has a long history with firearms and using them competitively. So it's ended up, let's see, it had said a rambling Facebook post. Fred Hopkins indicated that he was a Vietnam veteran who is a cancer survivor. What is the relevance of that? None. Maybe with the firearms, but Vietnam was a pretty long time ago, and I'm pretty sure it's not like riding a bicycle when you pick up a firearm after that long. So he has an ailment attributed to Agent Orange exposure. A court document in his child support case indicated that he was wounded in Vietnam. So they're trying to bring up that he was a gun enthusiast and that he had child support bills that he needed to pay, and he had been a survivor of cancer from Agent Orange. So, again, I'm not really sure where they're going with any of this or how it's connected to the story. So, it said that let's see, he had been disbarred as a lawyer back in 1984. I'm sure that's the reason that he responded the way he did when officers came in 2018, 34 years later. The state of journalism today. So it goes through his past. Looks like they discuss his marriage, his divorces, the fact that he was disbarred, the fact he liked guns. They're just trying to do a character assassination on him throughout this whole article. And of course, he can't respond to any of this because he's in the hospital with head injury that may or may not have been caused by police. Authorities said gunfire has shot all over. They said officers saw fellow officers down. The way the suspects were positioned, his view of fire was several hundred yards, so he had an advantage. The officers couldn't get to the ones that were down. Pretty sure when you're one guy facing off against 2 police departments, that you don't have the advantage. Just by numerical superiorities and firepower superiorities. I mean, I'm no expert on these things, but pretty hard to make the case that he had the advantage over law enforcement officers responding to an active shooting situation with multiple officers involved. Initial reports had said that 5 officers were shot. However, later reports said that as many as 7 officers were shot, with a 20-year-old man who was also shot. Doesn't say who shot the 20-year-old man, but I'm assuming it was the guy shooting the rifles. It'd be really shitty of them to slip that in as if he didn't shoot it when it was an officer who shot it. So we'll just assume that it was the individual 74-year-old Fred Hopkins who shot him. Doesn't say that, but we'll just give it the benefit of a doubt. So he really laid the smackdown on them. I mean, one 74-year-old guy with a rifle shooting 7 other officers before being taken out, whether by himself or others. Pretty phenomenal odds there on his part. Especially when they were going into a hostile situation, they knew that they were serving a warrant on this case and probably were prepared for resistance if they were following standard procedure, which I have no reason to assume they wouldn't. One officer, Corway, died in the shooting. 2 of the other officers' conditions were described as touch and go, according to the WPDE TV. Is that a police department to look at? The officer who died is a City of Florence police officer. Carolina Hospital Systems in Florence is temporarily on lockdown following the shooting. Why? Why would you lock down the hospital after a shooting unless you suspect that the shooter is going to have somebody else come behind him? Who knows? Maybe these police left the gun on him when they took him to the hospital. The level of incompetence here is staggering. It's not like he's going to get up and start shooting up the hospital, or that somebody else is going to come in and start shooting on his behalf. There's no evidence to suspect that whatsoever being presented. The station added, according to neighbors, the initial call was for shots fired inside the home. The active shooting situation is over, and the suspect is in custody. We are asking everyone to stay away from Vintage Plaza, as the place is, Vintage Place, is where it is still a place of an active crime scene in progress. Emergency management wrote on Facebook. I don't know when we started using Facebook as our source of information to convey public messages through government resources. It's an interesting observation. The message was stamped on high priority on Twitter. Here we go on social media again. Governor Henry McMaster wrote on Twitter, "This is simply devastating news for the Florence area. The selfless acts of bravery from men and women in law enforcement is real, just like the power of prayer is real." Oh, whoa. Now, this is what happens when you live in a society that is not fact or evidence or reason based. You end up with really dumb statements like this that, just does not reflect kindly upon the reason or ability of officers to take their statements into account like this. Wow. Just like the power of prayer is real. We agree. We agree. A local high school was put on lockdown as a precautionary measure. So after he gets done shooting up the hospital, when he wakes up with the gun that they left him with, he's going to mosey on down to the high school and shoot that up too. People are fucking morons. These are the people that we imbue with power to walk around with guns and to sit as governors and to make decisions about hospitals and high schools, even trust your kids with these people. And their display of intelligence or lack thereof is unsettling, to say the least. So, yeah, 74-year-old man kicked the crap out of a bunch of police officers and managed to survive. Good on him. For the officers fallen, my heart goes out to their families. That must be terrible to wake up and find out that your loved one has died. But just as in war, any war, if you look at the Nazis, I feel just the same for their spouses and loved ones when they found out their soldiers died. But do I feel bad that their soldiers died? Not a bit, for the individuals who decided to dedicate themselves to that kind of cause. It's truly shameful to dedicate yourself to the oppression and destruction of a society of your fellow citizens at the taxation of those citizens. And I think that in the case like this, they got their just desserts.